Hello!
Ja, är du redo?
Yeah, I'm running. This week's code cookie will perhaps, or I should say first greetings and welcome to this week's code cookie. I think it will be a little different this week because we're going to talk about our new feature that came last week, and that's provisioning key. And perhaps this video will be somewhat longer, but let's not waste any more time, just throw ourselves into it. So, work authentication. Today we have a Zervicepoint server and you have your browser, which you use to visit Zervicepoint. On the Zervicepoint side we have a provisioning system, we call it. It's basically a worker that carries out and runs all the scripts in your workflows. And we have a process system which basically supplies the jobs to the provisioning system. And then we have the ticket providers here that can authenticate you or tell Zervicepoint that you are actually you. So what we've been doing traditionally is that when you, we have the user web as well. What we have done before is that when you place an order in the user web, the provisioning system has been going to the ADFS to get a ticket or a token rather, and then polling the process system with this authentication token saying, give me the provisioning jobs. And process system have supplied all the scripts that the worker needs to run. What we have done now is that we have, instead of just going to the ADFS, the worker actually goes to the local credential store, picks up a secret key, and then with that key it can talk to the process system and get the next provisioning jobs. And the process system can validate that key towards the database. And therefore we don't need the ADFS anymore. So what is it good for? First off, we do not need the ADFS anymore, as long as you use Azure login for users. And that means more stability, so you don't depend on the ADFS anymore. And it doesn't need to be up all the time, and well, you rely less on infrastructure in general. And it means faster onboarding time and less setup, because setting up the ADFS can be a bit awkward sometimes, and usually the technicians doesn't do it a lot, and once they do it they need service windows and stuff like that if it's a larger organization. Now you can just generate the key, configure your worker, and then you should be good to go. And that is what we should try to do now. So we have two guides here on our documentation space. These will soon move to our new docs site. So one of the guides handles how to set up the worker to work with the keys. The other guide handles how to set up our API to work with the key instead of ADFS. So let's start with changing on the worker side. So if you see my browser here, we have done some changes to the edit store view. We have removed the on-premises tab and moved those settings into worker authentication and API authentication basically. So if we look at the worker authentication, this is what we have today. So the scenario I'm going here is that we have Zervicepoint installed and we want to change from ADFS to key and then basically remove the ADFS server. So the first thing we do is we go into here and we change from ADFS to key. And then we need to generate the key. So the key is basically the secret which the worker will use to tell Zervicepoint that it's actually me and I'm allowed to get a response on my questions basically. So we generate a new key, and this we must copy because it will only be showed once, and afterwards we can see that the key has been generated. We have a date and we have a identity of who did it. We save, and now all of a sudden our process system will only accept key as authentication method. So now we need to do the changes on the worker as well. And when I say worker, I mean provisioning system. So on this setup, we have a Zervicepoint on one server. So we pretend that I'm on the actual Zervicepoint server now. So if we look on the guide, these are the two first steps, and we have generated the key, and we copy the key, and we make sure to click save. Did I click save? We do it again. And then we need to be on the server running the provisioning system. So let's go into this configuration file. And I have a slightly different path than you will have, because I have a development machine here. So I'm going into my own path, and you go into your path. And we go into the provisioning system. Where's the provisioning system? There we go. It's not that, no. And we go into there. Okay, so we have some configuration elements that are important here. We have the authentication method that needs to be key. So I have already configured that here. It can be key or ADFS. If it says ADFS, you change to key. And then we have applies to is important as well, because you need to specify the Zervicepoint instance which your key applies to. Then you have the credential identifier. So this should be provisioning key or whatever identifier whatever you like, basically, as long as you create a credential with this name afterwards. So now let's create a credential, and we need to create a credential for the account running the provisioning system. So I'm gonna run a PowerShell prompt as a different user. This is my service account. And since this is a Zervicepoint server, I have access to the PowerFrame commandlets that comes with our plugins. So I can run this commandlet, for instance. If it wakes up, there we have it. Provisioning key. I believe I already have one, but let's remove. Let's start over. Provisioning key there, and we do a new key, and we call it provisioning key because that's what we have in the configuration file. Username can be whatever. Let's call it key. Password needs to be the password that we just saved, generated. So there we go. Let's go to the guide again. So we have done this part, and we have created the new credential. There are some options here on what you can do if you don't have access to this commandlet. You can log on the server as the service account, and you can do it the usual way through the credential store and create the credential that way. And then we have another way if you have access to our API. So that's something we can do in this scenario as well, where we're on the same server. We could run these two commandlets. And we need to do this configuration for provisioning system inventory as well. So if we go in here, no, we go in, we go into the inventory, and the path is specified here, but again I have a different path. And I already have authentication method set to key, credential identifier is provisioning key. On my setup, it's the same account that runs both inventory system and provisioning system. So I don't need to create this credential for some other account, because the one I just created can be utilized in both these services. Applies to is set correctly as well. And back to the guide. Yeah, and now we'll restart both services and we're good to go. I will not do that because I will go over to the next part of this guide. I will set up key for the API as well, and that's a different guide. Much of the steps are the same. The first thing we do is go back to the admin web. API authentication, we go to key, we add a user, and I'm going with my common account. I'm gonna click here to say we need to be central admin as well. We need to be able to access all stores. And then I will generate a key, copy that key, put it in my secret notepad, and save. So now our API will only allow access using key and not ADFS tokens. So we go back here, we generate, and we need to okay, so we're on the same server. We have the API commandlets installed here, so that's an easy scenario. If you don't have that, if you have you want to run the API from a machine, a different machine, then you can take the commandlets or install the web API on the different machine, and you can run these commandlets from there. So I'm just gonna I can't copy this because my module is not on the same place here, but I'm gonna run a new window here. And I'm gonna import the module first. And I have it in a slightly different location, or very different location. And soon. Very many files here. There we go. And now I need to specify the URL. If you have the environment variable set, you don't need to do this step. So we're gonna run this same commandlet. Key credential, take the key. We have that in Notepad. URL we need to specify. There. Now we should be good actually. Let's see if there's any steps left. No, it's just trying it. So get set up a order. We can send in the URL because we need that since I don't have the environment variable set. Did I save? Yeah, I did save. So This will actually enable a bit easier use of the web API or the PowerShell API, because you don't need to retrieve tokens and care about the token lifetime as well, because this token doesn't expire because it's just a key. Okay, so I hope you learned something today, and I hope you start to use the provisioning key and the API key instead of ADFS. Hopefully it should be easy for you to implement as well. If you have a fresh install, you have options for this in the installer as well. But it basically choose the setting in the admin web, make the changes on the provisioning system's configuration file, on inventory as well, create credentials for the service accounts that runs these processes, and you're good to go. Same goes for the PowerShell API as well. So thank you, and see you next time.